All right, here we are once again. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Gill Athletics Track and Field Connections podcast, bringing you coaches from around the world. And today we've got a coach from kind of the bottom of the country, right? We're going to go to Louisiana today. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Miss Stefanie Slekis. Stefanie, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. You are at Nicholls State. Tell us, where is Nicholls State at?
So we're in Thibodaux, Louisiana, which obviously there's a funny meme that goes around Facebook about where I then have to explain from there that, I'm near New Orleans or Baton Rouge or about an hour away from those places. We can get to LSU in 70 cool minutes. So we love going up to there to race and compete. But we're in the Bayou region. So, if you come down and the food that's in New Orleans, you're going to have that same kind of food and flavor here right off Bayou Lafourche. And I've gotten much better at my pronunciation of French
Yeah.
names since coming. That was my biggest mom accomplishment, was teaching my daughter Polly to say Bayou Lafourche when school was closed. And her teachers were impressed that my 3-year-old, we crossed over on our bike. We would cross over Bayou Lafourche often during our stay-at-home order times. We would go for bike rides. So
So say
yeah,
it again. Bayou, that's the easy word. Lafourche.
Lafourche, Lafourche.
And what does that mean?
I
Lafouche.
have no
No
clue.
clue.
I
Didn't
have
get that
no
far.
clue. I pronounced it correctly though.
I'm so ashamed. You talked about the food. My favorite memory of Thibodeau is when I was down there. Gosh, I don't know. With COVID time, it's hard to remember how long ago was this. It feels like it was yesterday, but I know it was probably 2 years ago when I was down in Thibodeau. Um, I did Raising Cane's. You have a, it's one of my favorite places. But on that trip, I went to Raising Cane's 3 times in a row. So I went to like lunch when I was with you. Later on, wherever I was staying at, I had dinner, and then the next day at lunch, and I was putting it on social media, and I was like, "Don't you judge me." It's like, we don't have a Raising Cane's where I'm at, so I got to get as much as I can when I'm on the road. But the sad part is, there's so much better food in your area than Raising Cane's. I'm so embarrassed.
I say if Scott Williamson is listening, he's going to be very disappointed that I let you eat Raising Cane's and did not take you to Bubba's 2 or another. At least I should have brought you to like the jambalaya shop, and had some quick Cajun cuisine. But no, I
I'm
think that's probably the saddest part about COVID is I'll explain to people some of my favorite things about being in Thibodeau. And I realize so much is food related and like communal food gatherings, right? Like,
right.
I don't know if we have time for this tangent, but one of my favorite things from our most recent edition of our home cross country meet that we've established since I got here out at the Nicholls farm is we had a group of guys from Morgan City, which is like 45 minutes away, that had no relations to our cross country team, track and field program, but they're guys that went to Nicholls, support Nicholls. I met them at a booster event, and they said, "Well, who cooks for you guys at the meet?" And I was like, "Well, no one cooks for us. We got like sandwiches, the last year." And he's like, no, we're going to come cook for you. And they made this giant pot of pastalaya. There was so much pastalaya that LSU guys were eating pastalaya, Tulane
Wow.
guys. Like there was just, and it's, we had another alumni make breakfast tacos for our alumni. And so it just communal food is such a
Mm.
big part. And so that's been one of the other hard parts, I think, about being down in this region during that time is that that's one of my favorite things is that. So, yeah.
It's amazing the different cultures that we have, here in the United States. Down there in your area, food and that communal food that's a big deal. We had, when I was coaching at Troy University, we had a javelin thrower from Louisiana. And so when we would come in to go to LSU and other meets, like it was like it wasn't an invitation, it was a expectation. You were going to go to their house, they were going to cook for the team. I mean, there was no like you know we're going to do something else. It was like, no, you're coming here. We're going to do the crawfish boil, the etouffees and things like that. And honestly, when you think back on your college, whether an athlete, which we'll get into from your history, or as a coach, that's where some of the greatest memories are. We talk about the PRs and the school records and the, qualifying for nationals, but then when we really tell stories, it's like, oh, I remember sitting down with you at that one crawfish boil and, learning your story and hearing you tell Joe, that's what life is about, but that's what coaching is about, the relationships.
Definitely. I think that's everything in life is you think back to those relationship moments. And obviously you said coaching is so much of that. And you remember, what were you drinking and eating when you were having those memories, and just that shared time. And like you said, the communal aspect's just so so much a part of it. And I think that's across the country, but definitely down here, I mean, I don't think there's other places where you just think about like, the giant pot, that's like, what are we going to cook? Like, how many different things can you cook in these giant pots? And you come out to, tailgating. And, this year football starts today at Nicholls, FCS championships this spring.
Yeah.
So it's freezing down here. I don't think I'll be attending a 6 p.m. game when it's 34 degrees. I'm such a Southerner now. But there's no tailgating, and I knew that was going to be the case, but it's just sad when you think about normally I would have walked around and everyone feeds you, and you're just like, I'm full.
Right.
And it's like, no, have this. And just so much good food that can be cooked in one big pot,
Right,
So.
that's right. And we'll get into your history here in a little bit, but you mentioned, community and Nicholls State. You mentioned the cross country meet. So tell me more about you. How long have you been at Nicholls State? Some of the things that this cross country meet that you started. Tell me some of the things that you're doing, what you're excited about there at Nicholls State right now.
Yeah, so being at Nicholls, which we actually go by Nicholls, not Nicholls State now. That's a fun thing with some of our alumni, which is also fun for me because my whole time at North Texas was the rebranding of UNT versus North Texas. And so you'd always, an NTSU, and people calling it the older name versus the newer name. And so that's one of the funny things. I'm like, here I am again, where we have two names, right? So yeah, we're listed as Nicholls State, but we normally just refer to ourselves as Nicholls once you say Nicholls State University. So being at Nicholls, like I said, I think that it was the opportunity to come in and kind of build something. I mentioned Scott Williamson earlier. He was not the head coach right before me, but the coach before that. And my office is still decorated with some of his athletes' accomplishments. I've added my own stuff, but a lot of the stuff in my office is still his. A lot of the best women to come through the program, were some of his athletes. And so there's a great connection there. And I've gotten to visit with him, and he still follows along with the program. And I think that goes back to the communal aspect, right? That, here's his previous coach that still, now he's at Nevada, but he's still invested in us and wants to see us do well. And that's just how people down here are, so maybe it's the time he spent here too. But, coming in and people just buying in and wanting to see our program be successful, and me really being able to brand us as multiple sports, I think is something neat to this community, that they really see our team as cross country and an indoor and outdoor track and field team. So I think that's neat that we don't end up just lumped in all together. And so that's been, neat for our student athletes that we've talked about, the upgrades we've had to our cross country facilities, right? That we've built a course out at the Nicholls Farm. We're actually part of the master plan for the Nicholls Farm, which is something pretty neat. Dr. Quentin Fontenot is in charge of the Nicholls Farm, head of the biological sciences department. And they just got another $250,000 grant out there for this. I don't know, it's like a wetlands that's going to have a nature trail, this really cool addition to the farm. There's a huge space out there that they had been leasing as a cattle lease that now they're taking back, and it's expanded. The base loop we have for the course that I've built with Dr. Fontenot is right around 2 to 3K, depending on how we want to run it. We added on an 800-meter loop that we kind of cross the bridge that we built to last year. But there's this whole section that they started mowing out to get to this new thing they're going to build. So it's going to be a space that we can get in more regular runs as a team. But even when teams come to warm up, we now have a warm up trail, right? That you don't have to warm up on the course. So it's neat that it's starting to become a real facility. And then also we have a 1,200-meter grass track on campus that we host the Manning Passing Academy in Thibodaux. So if a lot of people know that about Thibodaux, that Eli and Peyton and their dad Archie host this football camp here every June. And there's these big grass fields behind our football stadium before the hospital. And when I got here, I started flagging it off like any cross country coach would, to be there's all this grass, let's run here, right? And so our grounds guy, Troy Babin, saw me doing it and was just hey, you need to move your flags, we're mowing out here. And then he realized there was a pattern to what I was doing, and was well, should we make this an actual track? And he just loves what he does. He takes great pride in what our university looks like. We have a really pretty campus, I think, a lot of greenery, and he takes a lot of pride in how everything's laid out. And so he started treating the grass that we run this route on and mowing it. And so we have this 1,200-meter loop. And, even this year, he told me the baseball coaches said, when do we get a cross country course through our extra area? Because it's also behind baseball. And he's I don't know, I wanted the loop to be continuous. So that even changed some of their practice grass. We now have our loop cuts through to make it a perfect 1,200. And so just things like that, that they're so supportive of the team, and that it's just as important for cross country to have our little loop as it was for, baseball to have their practice grass. So
Well,
it's pretty neat. So
as an advocate for track and cross country, I love when um, the responsibility, where you put in the sport, the priority, that's the word I'm looking for, when the priority is high. I love that it, a lot of schools that have been like, hey, this is going through baseball's area, cut it out. We're not doing that. And instead it was like, okay, baseball, work around it. We're going to figure this out. Um, so
and it's just grass that they like throw on. It's behind there. It's it's like there's like a mound the students sit on like in the game, like to watch games, and then there's this nice grass that they groom for them that they practice out there. So we start cutting the loop off if we're out there running easy and they're doing stuff. But we always practice in the morning if we're doing like a
right,
workout out there, so they're not throwing the ball.
right,
But they just do like some of their drill stuff out there. It's not
right.
not like we're in the way, if that makes
No,
sense.
no,
So yeah,
absolutely, exactly.
yeah.
So something we've not talked about, and you have experience and expertise here. This would be kind of an interesting topic. As a track guy first, cross country person second, you've built a cross country course, and I'm thinking of the Indiana State's cross country course, Indiana's cross country course. I'm thinking of some of these. Every stop that I've been at Troy, Mississippi State, we had cross country courses. What is it? And you mentioned some of the aspects, but what does it take to build a cross country course? On one hand, it seems easy, right? It's like, oh, it's just a path that people need to run. But there's a lot of, I believe you're going to tell us, but I believe there's a lot of considerations, right? As far as like how many teams you're going to have. And so how do they get to the alley? How difficult do you want to make it? What goes into a cross country course, and what makes a really good cross country course? Like what's the piece de resistance, if you will?
Yeah, I think money goes into a really good cross country course. So when
Okay.
you're Texas A&M and you could spend a couple million building your course, you haven't been down to College Station to see what they've built out at their equestrian park. I mean, it's beautiful, right? But I think Coach Henry and Wendell do everything well, right? So they put a lot of work into that, and the drainage they put into that, they built that from scratch in the sense of like they took some land, cleared it out, and like built it. Does that make sense? So like that's kind of one style. That's I think you have good funding style of doing it. I think the other style, I mean, obviously Florida State has money, but also took time to build theirs, right? Where they like just kept making it better, right? Like, so
Mhm.
they had taken this original course. And then since then, they've just been able to expand it, add on to it. I mean, I couldn't believe this year they had this beautiful building that they added on. So just the bonuses. But I mean, also Coach Raymond's been out there leaf blowing himself, So like, I think he kind of does a little bit of the blue collar and the let's use money to do it. And I think, Wendell's been out at the A&M course as
Of
well,
course.
working on it. But I think for me, looking at building it at, a mid-major where maybe you're not going to drop $1 million on a
Mhm.
cross country course. You kind of just look at the land you have. Obviously, when I got to North Texas, the course we had there, it was better that I had an old golf course section.
Mm.
So I do have experience in the past that when I got to North Texas, we were hosting Conference USA that fall. So I got hired in the summer, and it was like, hey, by the way, you're hosting a championship here.
Hello.
And yeah, and the course map I had didn't make sense to me from like the previous running of it. And I guess the college version of the meet was never that big. And so the high school coach I worked with there had also run at North Texas. And he said, I'm fine if you redo the course. Like, look at it and see what makes sense. And so for me, I just, how my brain works, I looked at the space I had and said, like, let's make the biggest perimeter we can make on good footing, and then make an inner perimeter to like make the base loop bigger.
Mm.
I think I look at some of the big championship courses, there's always just like a base loop, and then you have these mini loops off of it. That's great for spectating. You look at like World Cross is always on a 2K. Like New Zealand champs are always on a 2K loop. A lot of other countries do that. So I think that was what I looked at there. And then coming here, it's like, okay, we had the space at the farm. The tricky part about that is that the footing's not going to be an old golf course, right?
Mm.
So we looked at it. I did, an outer perimeter, inner perimeter, and then we've been basically the biggest challenge is trying to get the footing better, right? That you're taking, we went out, I say we, Dr. Fontenot drives the giant tractor. I'm only cleared to drive the little John Deere mower. But you don't want me on the giant tractor. But Dr. Fontenot will use it as like, time to like relax, to like go out and work on the farm. And so, he gets him on the big tractor and he dug it all up and then like box bladed it. Like, cause we had the area that we had to choose as the start area. Cause you kind of like naturally just look at the land you have and it's like, well, where's my biggest start line? You want to have, and so they rules, you need 800 meters for your straightaway, right? So before there's a major turn, which is one of the things about like the Louisville course is that there's technically like a turn earlier on. There's a little bit of a ditch earlier on versus you look at, College Station, I think you have over 700 meters. Florida State, I think it's over 800 meters. Obviously Terre Haute, well, I think it's well over 800 meters. So for us, the other minimal goal is 400, right? So I think when you're looking at a smaller capacity for a conference meet, can you have 400 meters straight away, which we have like 440 meters, I think, before we turn left. So, and it's not quite 90 degrees turning left, but it's, so, and it's pretty wide. But that was a bluegrass field because they do all sorts of research out there. So there was actually a research project that was finishing up that Dr. Bono had to tell them, like, well, we're not going to replant in this plot. It's going to become a cross country course. And so, because I was like running it and was just like, what is this other grass that's like in here? And he's like, oh yeah, we need to dig that up. So that all got it dug up. We also ordered a whole bunch of Bermuda grass seed through, I don't think it's a competitor. I can mention Dufresne. I think that's one of our, Dufresne's just like a supply company in town that sponsors Nicholls that we were able to use our trade with them to get 200 pounds of Bermuda grass seed. So that's the project to finally be done this spring, is that we want to add some grass seed to like the start where we took out the bluegrass into this additional 800-meter loop we added. I know I'm rambling on about cross-country courses. I don't know if anyone will find this interesting. The other biggest thing I've been working on is trying to get a roller. I've talking with John Deere about that. That's still kind of one of the projects that hasn't quite happened, but we're hoping by the time we host conference this fall that we can plant the new Bermuda grass seed and roll it. But even just like mowing the same pattern, and like we've treated it with like chemicals, like it still starts to make it better footing, right? And the better grass will start to come up. We had sections of that loop that were already being manicured because of some of the agricultural plots out there. So there's certain sections that the footing's like beautiful, like it's great, like it's a cross country course. And then there's other sections where like, one of my buddies is like, well, when we come run at your cane field, Stefanie. And I'm like, well, we're working on it. It wasn't a cane field. It was a crawfish farm. Let's be clear. But it's fun. And they also have added like alligator gar ponds are inside one of our loops. So, I mean, it's just neat to be out there because there's so much happening for research in this area. Alligator gar is a special kind of fish that Nicholls has a whole gar lab where Dr. Solomon David works on that with his students. They go out there and there's alligator gar living out there now. But anyways, I'm rambling on, but there's lots of stuff happening at the farm, but our course is part of that master plan, which is just kind of neat that there's all this research happening out there. There's all these grants they get. And then, the Dr. Clune, our president, and then, Dr. Fontana have been supporters of let's have that be a home facility for our cross country team. So, yeah.
Well, I love that you brought up alligator gar. We, from time to time, will get questions from Twitter for our guest. And you mentioned Scott Williamson before, who was a former Nicholls coach. See, I'm learning. I can appreciate this. I graduated from Troy State University, and then they didn't ask me, but they changed the name to Troy University. And I'm trying to be a good alum and say Troy University, but my degree says Troy State, so I'm trying. So I'll work on the Nicholls, not the Nicholls State. So Scott is a former coach there at Nicholls, and he had two questions, and you hit them on here a little bit. One is, well, first, I'm gonna do a second one first because we were talking about food. He mentioned Bubba's 2 seafood. They still have the best seafood, and I think I've heard that maybe Bubba's isn't around anymore. Tell me about Bubba's.
No, it's still there, and I see it every day on my drive to work. It's like my street comes out right in front of it, and then I turn on the Bayou Road. But obviously, I don't want to be, we get sad talking about things of COVID and the impact of that. But it was interesting that Scott brought that up, and it's just like, well, it still hurts. It just happened, 2 weeks ago that Neil Swanner, the owner of Bubba's 2, who's a big pillar of our community, big supporter of Nicholls, huge supporter of our women's softball program, passed away. But he's someone that, every time I saw him at Barker Hall, our main athletics building, it's, how are you doing? What's going on with you? And just like very supportive of all of our teams. He did a lot of fundraisers for scholarship programs. And that's when I I first met him, and my husband like couldn't believe like what he said to me the first time I met him, and I don't think I can say it has a curse word in it, but he was like, "Are you worth a like?" And I was just so taken back, like, oh my god, he just asked me that when he met me at this like thing. He's like, "Oh, you're the new track coach. Are you worth it?" And I was like, "Okay," but then I learned that that's just him. He's funny and this great personality, and like I said, it's someone that we're really gonna miss, and
Yeah.
it doesn't seem real. I saw him this fall at Barker randomly one day because he was dropping off a
Hmm.
check, and visited with him. But I think that that's a staple of our community. I think that it will be back up and running, but right now the restaurant has said it was temporarily closed because he was still the one running it.
Well,
So yeah.
next time I'm in town, we're going.
Well, and that's where
That'll
I
be the
couldn't say over Twitter. I don't really like sandwiches. So like po'
oh,
boys is like a big thing. So when
oh
everyone's like,
yeah,
"Well, have you been there?" Like it's a po' boys place, and I'm like, "Well, I don't really like sandwiches.
got
I'm
it.
weird." But I will take you, and I'll eat something else. Um,
That's what we'll
but
do it. We'll do it. And then he also asked, and I hope the answer is 0 to this question. And we're going to learn about your athletic background in distance running. He asked, how many alligators have you come across during your runs in Thibodeau? Please tell me the answer is 0, that you are not just regularly running into dinosaurs essentially on your run.
no, I mean we get asked that because like the bayou is literally right there, and they actually just broke ground on this new project where like there's gonna be a whole new space at the front of our campus, amphitheater space, like boat launch space, like adding on to what we already have with like a little path that you can run along the bayou and like have lunch and stuff down there. But that's not where the alligators hang out. They hang out outside of Rotolo's Pizzeria. So if you want to see the gators, because they're definitely in the bayou, they're not there. But you just go down a little bit down the, well, I guess not that's down the bayou, up the bayou. I guess it'd be up the bayou because it's heading away from Raceland. But you go to Rotolo's, there's like a patio. That's where our coaches show is for like the football coaches talk show. But my daughter Polly loves to go to Rotolo's and look at the gators. So we see them off the back there.
Like they're just hanging
Um,
out.
Oh, they're just hanging out. And I mean, I have driven by them, but it was on my way back from Baton Rouge. I was coming back from like a booster event one night, and there, sure enough, there was a gator like almost onto like this smaller highway when I got off the main
Oh,
highway. And so there's definitely gators around. I guess I've run by a gator in Florida though. So I was, because as a runner, like, you're just gonna, if you want to go run in a park, you're gonna run there. But there's some parks in Florida that the gators are definitely on the path.
dude,
So
when you see those viral videos of like, you see it a lot on golf courses where the alligator is just walking by. I mean, that's a little bit. The only thing that's more terrifying than that is when you see the bears that are just hanging out on the golf course. It's like, an alligator, I feel like I can stay far enough away and maybe can run faster because I'm gonna have a huge head start. A bear, I feel like, oh, if he just wanted to run me down, I'm a bear snack that day.
yeah, I did a lot of camping growing up, and like when you have to go and have like the bear food lockers, and you have to like lock your food in the locker, like that's when bears are pretty scary. And like you
No way.
you read stories. Like I'm glad I didn't have a smartphone to like Google those stories when I was younger. Like the bears like rocking the car. But no, I'm not afraid of gators down here because like I don't go where gators go. Right?
Exactly.
I did do like a kayak tour. One of my friends flew in, not this summer, the summer before, and we went and did like a bayou kayak tour that like you were like kayaking right by gators, and I was that was a little bit like. I'll run by one before I want to be kayaking by one.
Right.
But
You're in their territory. They have the advantage at that point.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, you mentioned running and cross country. Let's start talking about. Let's quit beating around the bush. You're a distance runner, so let's talk about where did you grow up and how did track become a part of your life?
yeah, so I grew up in Northern Virginia. My parents are both from Boston, Massachusetts, but we migrated to what they call South, and now I live in the real South. But they migrated to Virginia because of my dad being in the military, right? He got stationed, I think, in the Pentagon to begin with. And so I was born in Philadelphia, though my parents were in Yardley, Pennsylvania for a couple years. I guess my sister was born in Boston and then they moved there. I was born in Philadelphia. My dad was teaching ROTC at Princeton. And then, but we lived in Pennsylvania. We didn't live in New Jersey. And then we moved to Northern Virginia when I was 2 or so. And then my parents still live in the same house, which is weird for like a military family.
Wow.
My dad just got like stationed around there. So, he was in the Pentagon. I guess my fun story I always tell with that is that I I grew up getting to roller skate in the basement of the Pentagon. My dad took me to work and my sister to work a couple of times. They had to work on the weekends,
Cool.
and I remember them having these really old linoleum looking floors, and like my dad letting us roller skate while he worked. So I don't know if I'm allowed to tell that story. I guess hopefully. But that's one of my fond memories. My dad working at the Pentagon, and then worked in Crystal City, like around there, and then his final job he was actually at Quantico. So they're like
Wow.
my parents live like 15 minutes away from Quantico, like north of Quantico. So but anyways, getting into running also started because my dad was like always running for his PT test. And so it was just something for us to do together. I grew up doing like swim team. I was homeschooled through 8th grade. So that's a fun fact.
Yeah.
So I was involved in like choir, theater groups. And then like for athletics, it was mainly the swim team that I was on, like a year-round swim team and then like a summer swim team.
Hmm.
And getting ready for high school, and I did like church basketball, but I'd done like the runs with my dad like in middle school age, right? And
Mhm.
we were getting ready for me to go to high school, and I wanted to play a team sport. These girls I really looked up to at my church played field hockey, so I had it in my head that field hockey was really cool because they got to wear skirts, and I just thought that, well, that's cool. You get to play a sport in your skirt, and so my mom had looked into me going, but you had to go to field hockey camp to be on the field hockey team. And I already had plans to visit my best friend at the time in Texas. I would spend like half my summer with her. And so we couldn't go to that. So my mom, she researched and was like, well, why don't you run cross country? Like she had run track in high school, not very fast, as she'll put it, but she was on a team where they like, jogged the curves, ran the straights, but she's like, why don't you do track? Like you're good at running. And so I met Coach Dave Davis and my teammate Beth Fahey in May, I guess, of like my 8th grade year, heading into going to Forest Park High School for my freshman year. And I got to go to the meeting and like meet some of the older girls on the team. And Coach Davis gave me like my mileage plan for the summer. And I bring up Beth Fahey because she actually ended up being a Foot Locker finalist and going to Arkansas to run.
Oh
So
yeah.
when you talk about like your journey into running, like what are the odds that you'll end up with a teammate that will be that good,
Right.
right? And she lived a mile away from me. So we learned that. And so for the next 2 years, she was the same age as my sister, 2 years older than me. Beth and I ran a lot together, not only at
Wow.
practice, but, for long runs on the weekend, we would just, I'd run down the hill to meet her. She'd run up the hill. We'd meet and go for our run and then part ways at the end. So I credit her and Coach Davis a lot. Coach Davis, I think, is now in the Hall of Fame for Virginia high school coaches
Oh
and
wow.
has coached a bunch of different places. But I had just had an amazing coach to start out. And then, the other women on the team were amazing too that I had. We ended up being third at the state my sophomore year, but only by like 3 points. So we had a really good team and they were all her age. They were all Beth's age. So really support teammates, but obviously, like I said, having Beth to train with and look up to
Yeah, I was going
was
to ask
huge.
you. I mean, obviously, a Foot Locker finalist. I mean, there's only call it a handful a year that do that. Back then, and went to Arkansas, of course. Great distance history there. What was it like, coming in as a freshman and you had this stud on the team? Was it intimidating? Was it challenging? Like, what was it like having that good of an athlete right off the bat?
I think I didn't really realize like how good she was, if that makes sense. And also, I was just
Mhm.
like wanted to make the top seven, and like you don't understand the sport besides like,
Mm,
oh, like the girl, these girls get to run in this race, like, and I don't even know if I really got like what freshman team versus JV team versus varsity meant for like field hockey, right?
right.
So it's like coming in, it was like, oh well, like if I want to run with my friends, I have to be in that race, right? And so the first meet, I remember we went down to I think it was Brentsville, I want to say. I can't think of the name. I think it was a B high school that was like double A that we went down to their little low key meet. And I ran and I beat my friend Karen, who was 2 years older than me. So she was one of the nicest older girls to me. I beat her in the race to make the top seven and she cried. And so it was like this, for me, this like dilemma of like, I want to have friends. I want to like be
Sure.
accepted because I'm this homeschool girl that's now coming to high school. And
Oh
here's
yeah.
one of the girls that's been the nicest to me that I beat her for this spot. They're like, well, I want the spot because I want to be on the team with all the, those
Mhm.
girls. And then like through that season, I don't even know if I really got like what I was doing, if that makes sense. But like every meet, I was improving. And then I remember the district meet, I think it was like my dad or someone had said something to me like, why don't you try to run with this person instead? Like, and so I went out and finished a lot better at that meet and then like moved up in the region meet. And so I mean, by the time we got to the state meet, I ended up being 16th in the state. I think I was the first freshman. And I
Wow.
think at that point I ended up being the number 2 girl on my team, right? But it was kind of, I'd have to go back and look at results to see how it really progressed. But
Right.
like I think a lot of it, I was just like going to meets and just like just didn't know what I was doing, just like tried hard in the workouts, got to the race, like tried to run with whoever. And then I do remember like at the state meet, Coach Davis telling me to like look up ahead and like count girls off. And so I think I got out in probably the 50s, and just like did a really good job of like working my way through. And then at the end, him yelling that I could be all state and I missed it by one spot. But then
Oh,
like my whole perception, what you learned like track season and coming back as a sophomore, like then I was dramatically better, right? And that was the year that like, Beth and I were, two of the top 5 girls in the state. Like all the talk was about her. Was she going to win the individual state title? That kind of pressure and watching her kind of deal with that pressure. Well, I also like we were just this duo, that like from there on. And so I didn't really think about making the top 7 anymore. It was more, co-leading a really good team, right?
mhm.
Leading in the sense of like just by performance, like, the older girls were definitely leading in terms of a leadership role. But yeah.
What was that like? So, you start a sport and, the social aspect is extremely important, right? We can sometimes try to say that it's not important, that it's all about the competition and the competition of yourself and improving. But to your point about, making the team and making friends and coming from a homeschool background, it's not like you went, first through 8th grade with these girls. You literally were the new kid as the freshman on the team. How did it go as you started getting more competitive, and then it does become a little bit more about you of like counting off people and making all state and things like that, and you've got this this again stud runner up front. How did, as you went through your career in high school, she graduates, how did that progress go? And then I'm assuming, because at a young age you were one of the top runners in Virginia, you were the top runner on your team junior senior year maybe. So how did that go as you moved into a leadership role?
Yeah, I think it's not as, you can look back and gloss over and say it was smooth, right? But I think sophomore year, there was a lot of like our friendship being tested that like,
Mm,
I caught up to her, right? And so me feeling like, wanting some of the attention more myself, like feeling like maybe I could start to win things. I think that was one of the times that like my coach then like transitioned me more focused on the mile as opposed to like the 2 mile had been what I ran as a freshman a little bit more. But that was also Beth's main event, and she was better than me at it. But I actually was better than her in the mile. So like in terms
mm,
of strategy for the team, like it was better for me to focus more on the mile. So my sophomore year, I ran mile 800 4x4 at like every meet. That was for a different coach. Our coach switched right at the end of Beth's senior year. So after cross country, Coach Davis left for another school to be, I think he went to be an athletic director at another high school. And then we had a new coach come in. And so I remember, focusing more on those. I also had an interesting teammate, Monica Wright, who is now a basketball coach at UVA. She played in the WNBA, won a championship. She was actually at my high school and ran on the 4x4 with me. So in terms of getting to work with like unbelievably talented athletes,
yeah.
it was kind of neat that I think that helped Beth and I. We had that rivalry in cross country, a little bit of like bit as my sophomore year, but then in track, me focusing more on mile 800 and being on the 4x4. Um, she had her time in the 2 mile and I was running those things, and that kind of smoothed that out as she headed off.
Hmm.
And then really, like you said, taking on that leadership role the next year, I think I did the best I could. You look back at some of the things you do as a junior and senior high school, and you're like, well, that wasn't the most mature thing. But I wanted us to be good. And I think there were points where I got frustrated at people not being as good as we could be, but we did always rise to the occasion. We made it as a team to state for both my junior and senior year. And I think it was my senior year that I still remember this girl, Diana Davis, that was a freshman that ran as our 5th girl. And that was why we made it out of the region. And she had a
Wow.
great day and was just like going into the meet. I was trying to defend my individual region title. And I was just frustrated that my teammates, hadn't been running as well as they could have been running for us to be a better team. But she rose to the occasion. We got to go my senior year to state. And I think that during that season, there was like me dealing with the pressure of like trying to be really good and like repeat on some things from my junior year. And then, dealing with like, well, I don't want to line up the state meet by myself,
Mhm.
and
Right.
wanting us to be better. But I also had a younger teammate that had developed pretty well herself. I think she got 8th at the state meet at one of the years, I want to say, for cross country. So, we had some of the younger girls develop underneath, but we never got better than the team I was on as a sophomore. So I think that was one of the things that maybe I also was
Frustration.
frustrated, wishing that we could have become even better. But in high school, you're not recruiting your talent. You're dealing with like, who came. And I still had some great friends on that team that, they just weren't as good of runners to win a state title. But they definitely tried hard and stuff. So yeah.
Well, hearing that authenticity, your actual experiences, I got to give a shout out. It reminded me of back on episode 73, we had Jim Canadle, and he wrote a book called Tale of Two Runners, where uh, it's a fiction book, but a lot of Jim's experiences are in there. So there's some nonfiction in there, but it's the tale of a son and a father, and how they went through running through high school and then college. And as you were telling those stories, it literally just struck me. It's like, oh, wait a minute, these are a lot of the parts of that book. So I got to give a shout out. Go to episode 73, listen to Jim, but also go check out his book, Tale of Two Runners. I'm not a distance guy, and I read it and I loved it. And I mean, that's might be the best plug I can give for him as a non-distance guy. Liked the story. It was a really engaging book. So talk to us. Where did you go to college? How did you make that choice? And what were you thinking?
So I went to Syracuse. My fun fact with that is Coach Bell and Coach Fox, I was the first one to officially sign with them. I did early signing my senior year. And I had been, I guess, fortunate enough to be recruited pretty early on. That was back where I think your junior year, there was like a week you could get phone calls or something like that, when how like the recruiting rules change over the years. I remember getting all these phone calls and like, the fun of like being a sophomore and junior, having all the letters at your high school, right? Which I now think with social media, like, that doesn't happen as much anymore. But I remember, that was like one of my favorite things, was like coming to school and having all these letters, and you'd fill out the questionnaire and send it back. And so yeah, I had a lot of my visits like already picked out, but Syracuse was like I was holding out on my fifth visit because the other visits had just not felt quite right. I don't know if I knew exactly what I was looking for, but I was just holding on to that fifth visit and had other schools that had offered, but I wasn't sure. And then Coach Bell had written me a handwritten letter that I still have. And my dad
Wow.
is actually a Syracuse alum. He has his master's from Syracuse.
Cool.
And yeah, my parents were like, oh, like, look, this coach like wrote you this handwritten letter. Like, seems like they're really interested. And they had just started that summer. So they were like kind of later in the game of contacting me. And so I decided to go there on my final visit. And it was like days before the signing day. And I just think I just loved the coaches there, and I just loved the idea of being a part of building something. That's what they really sold me on, and I think that's what they did, was build something from the ground up. And obviously at my high school, best class was the first 4-year graduating class from Forest Park High School. So like my sister's class, like it was a new school, right? And so then to come in and run for Coach Davis, and we talked about like building our program and kind of creating a name for Forest Park in the state, like that's something that had appealed to me at a high school, which I was just kind of
Mm,
thrown into it, right? But
right.
then when picking a program, that was something that I really liked about Syracuse, and also just feeling like I was going to be really important on the team, right? That part of building it, and being able to get that attention, I think really appealed to me. And so yeah, so it was the best choice I could have made, because I think also it spurred me into college coaching. There's a lot of Syracuse alum that are in college coaching, and I don't know if that's just like who they recruit, end up being people that just love the sport that way, or if it's also part of like how you're raised while you're there. That like I didn't have a perfect 4 years by any means, but like somehow I still graduated with like this like deep love of the sport,
Hmm.
like just loving it so much more than before I even got there, right? Even though I'd been through some rough spots. So yeah.
Well, you mentioned you got a public relations degree, which I have so much respect for, because I have a public relations degree. I don't know if you say it. This is the way I say when people ask me, what'd you get your degree in? I say, I got a BS in BS. That's basically what my degree was in.
Well, at Newhouse, they really frown upon using the word spin. So I think my professors would cringe if I said I got a BS in BS. So also, I got in trouble on swim team when I played BS, the card game. My dad was furious at me. So I probably won't say that. But no, I mean, I love being at the Newhouse School and the professors I had there. And I think that it's interesting how a PR degree doesn't sound like it's meant for college coaching, but then when you actually start to get into like what is it to be a college coach, and it's different everywhere, but I think that for a lot of the programs that maybe I'll have the opportunity to be the head coach of, like there's very few where you're operating as like a professional coach, right, where everything else is taken care of for you. I think that so much more we have to do as college coaches. You need this whole other skill set to do. It's
Hmm.
not just being a pro coach, right,
Right.
or just being a club coach. It's, and I don't say just, but it's not, it's,
Yeah.
you don't get to just coach, right? Like you have all these other hats you have to wear. And I think for me, that's something that like I embrace and I enjoy, and like things that I did like on the way with my PR degree that I didn't want to full time do that. So that's
Hmm.
why I didn't end up doing it. I still get to do here now. And so I don't hate the fact that I don't get to just focus on training and coaching all the time. Like, I think that's great if you want to spend 100% of your time doing that, or you're fortunate enough to. But I think I enjoy that I wear multiple hats. I have a master's in higher and post-secondary ed, right? So like doing a little bit of advising, like that doesn't bother me. Like I'm happy to do that. Like I want to sit here and talk to my student athletes about what they want to do academically in addition to just athletically, right? And so yeah, and I like fundraising, and I like, not say I love paperwork, but I'm good at paperwork, I think. And so it's fine, that I enjoy that I get to do a lot of different things within my position.
Yeah, I haven't met many coach. In fact, I don't know that I've met any coach that says they love doing the paperwork. I think they're kind of the same attitude you have. Is like, I don't mind it. I have to do it, so I'll do it. But no one's like, oh, I can't wait to get in the office and fill out my logs and all the other stuff that you have to do now.
I'm surrounded by receipts right now. So like my computer, you can't see my desk right now, but it's like I finished one trip yesterday, but with cross country and indoor happening at the same time, I always try to like finish a trip before I go on a trip. And instead I have two that overlapped and all this extra paperwork for one of the trips. But I'm going to get it done today. That's the goal.
Super tough juggling, doing one season, indoor, outdoor, cross is tough. Doing two, oh boy, that's a whole lot of juggling, figuring out all the scheduling and your athletes and where they're going to go and who's going to do what, man. That boggles me. So you mentioned, your PR degree. So you obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, it appears you did not go to college to become a coach, but you mentioned that your time at Syracuse spurred you into coaching. When did coaching start to sort of click for you as far as like, oh, this might be what I want to become for my career?
I remember, it's funny how my memory works. Like I just remember one little thing. Like I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember being on a long run with my teammates at Syracuse. I want to say junior, senior year, maybe it was senior year. And I'd been applying to graduate programs, and I said something about like, oh, well, maybe I think I want to be a college coach. And one of the girls said to me, well, I think your team would have a lot of fun, but they wouldn't win. And I was, just like hit me because, I was known by the young girls on the team on being like the bubble paint shirt girl, like the upperclassman that was like, hey, let's all get together and do this fun thing together, right? Okay. And I always enjoyed that stuff in high school. I was kind of like the social coordinator of our team, right? My friend Karen, the one I mentioned that cried after the first week because I beat her, she kind of did that. And then like I also kind of took over that as an upperclassman. That it was like, trying to be competitive and lead a competitive team, but also like leading the fun, and so I definitely enjoyed having fun in college, maybe to the detriment of my running at points, right? So I do have a hard time like laying down the law on my athletes where it's like, yes, we need to be serious, but then I also understand wanting to have experiences, right?
Right.
And so anyways, where was I going with this? So she made that comment and I still remember it. Obviously, I doubt she remembers making it, but it really just stuck with me where it's like, well, no, like, why can't I do both, right? Yeah, and if I end up being a college coach, like, I want to have a team of athletes that really enjoy the experience, but also can be competitive. And I think there was this little moment when we won at North Texas on the men's side at Conference USA of like, aha, like I can win, even having fun. But now I have to have a women's team win. It seems like that's my hang up, right? That I need to make sure I could get a women's team to win. That's the goal here at Nicholls. So is to see if our women's team can win in cross country. So but yeah, so that's kind of where that started. And then getting my master's in higher and post-secondary ed, it still wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go be a coach. It was kind of like, well, I know I want to work in higher education. I had a mentor in the Newhouse School, Max Patino, who was the director of recruiting and diversity recruitment. Yeah. And I signed up to be a Newhouse ambassador as a freshman, where we like did tours with prospective students. And I would spend like an hour a week there working for him in his office and, doing info sessions and tours with just like regular students. And so learning to recruit, right? Because he was recruiting the best students to the Newhouse School. And so here I was building a skill set for college coaching without realizing it, right? And yeah, and he was the one that told me like, well, you can just get your master's in higher ed and like work in higher education. It was like, so I knew that's what I wanted to do. Like I knew I wanted to work in a college setting. And I even tell recruits that now that like, I'm not the person that's going to, if I were to get the opportunity to go just be a coach, like be a coach. Like I love working with young people at this time in their life. And if college athletics cease to exist, I would probably want to work in academic affairs. I've now learned I don't think I'm as passionate about student affairs as I thought when I was going to grad school. I also dipped into Greek life a bit my last 2 years at Syracuse. So I also thought like maybe I would enjoy that. But then during my time at Florida State, I worked in the Office of National Fellowships with students applying to National Academic Awards, and that kind of reconfirmed that, like, obviously athletics comes first for me, but then the second part is I enjoy, academic achievement. So,
I probably missed
but
it. Where did you do your grad work?
no, I didn't say it. So I went to Arizona State is what I ended up doing. I got into OU, Florida State, and Arizona State, but Florida State was like the last one I got into. And Coach Fox talked to everyone for me and had said that Louis Quintana said he would coach me if I went out to Arizona State. And so I picked going out there because at that point I'd run 10:20 in the steeple, which back then was fast. Not
Right.
now. It's like, congratulations on your participation at the first round of the national
Don't say
championships.
that.
But at that point, 10:20 was pretty good.
Right.
And so, Louis had talked to me about could I break, 10:12, I think was what it was to qualify for the US championships. I didn't end up doing that. I ran faster in the 1500. I was a little bit injured, but also kind of realized that my own running wasn't what I cared as much about. I wanted to be coaching.
What year was this roughly when?
I went out there. I graduated 2010 from Syracuse. So the fall of 2010, spring of 2011, I was at Arizona State.
So we're still, even now in 2021, we're still in its infancy. But definitely back in 2010, 2012, we're in our infancy with women's steeple, because it didn't even become a Olympic event until 08 or 12.
I think it was 08.
08, yeah. So I mean that's yesterday, right? I mean, it's just amazing to me how like I said, in the infancy, an event like the women's steeplechase is like you talked about 10:20 back then was really good. We at Ball State we had a really good steeplechaser, and she was right around I think 10:12 or 10:15ish, and I was like, man, she was a stud. And now today it's like, oh man, look at what I'm probably going to butcher some of these names, but I think Colleen Quigley, I think she was a steeplechase, or is a steeplechase. Some of the Colorado girls, I mean, they're running like uber fast, like holy cow, like that's amazing how fast they can run the steeple now.
Well, I'm not certain without, like, I think I can poke fun at my own sport, but it's like now if you can't break 10 minutes, like you're not an elite women's steeplechaser, right? And that's where I said, it's interesting. My senior year was the first year of like the first round of the national meet. So this new 48 and 48 setup. And I made it in the 10K and the steeple. And now the times that like I made it with were like solid marks. Like you were into the meet for sure. And my 10:20 ranked me 8th in the East and 20th in the country. So that was a good mark. And then my 10K, I ran 34:57, and it wasn't like you were barely in. Like I was like solidly in, like maybe 30 something, right? And now it's like I said, like congratulations on your participation, or it's like you're not getting in maybe with the 10K time that I ran. And so that just speaks to like the great coaching we have at the Division I level, and women developing in the sport, and
that in a bar, right? So like when we had 4 regions, so before I don't think you were involved in the 4 region format in college, right?
I think it was 5 when I was right. Was there ever 5
for track?
Yeah.
So when you had that 4 and 5 region system, there was a minimum cutoff. And so when you have a bar, people, athletes and coaches, they raise to that bar. And so when you go to the 2 format, the 48, whatever that 48th time is, that becomes the new bar. And it just continues to get set. I think anytime you put a challenge in front of people, the mass of people will raise up to that bar. So, the bar was 10:20 back then, and now it's 10:05 and 10 flat, and it just continues. And you're right, coaching is getting so much better, right? We're doing, great things with Coaches Collab and Coaches Education, where more people are sharing their knowledge and their experiences, which is making more good coaches, not just this handful of good coaches. Like we're getting a bulk of a magnitude of good coaches out there. So what struck me is you go from Virginia to Syracuse. That's a leap. That's cold, right? I mean, there's a lot of snow in Syracuse, and then
it's only a 7-hour drive though. But it was a lot of snow. Yeah.
And then you go not a 7-hour drive to Arizona State. Like how was the culture shock? Training was different, I imagine. How was that as far as and working with the great Louis Quintana? Was it a culture shock? Did you fit right in?
I didn't know that people ran practice in the morning. Like, so when you talk about like, I always thought that like the morning was like a time for an easy double, right? So even in high school, like in Virginia, we would maybe run an easy run in the morning, shower at school, and then we had afternoon practice. Like, I don't think I'd ever done like, besides maybe like a Saturday long run or occasional workout we do on a Saturday, like it just like blew my mind when Louis said what time to see him for practice. It was like 5 something. I'm like,
because
what?
because you couldn't run at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, I tried. So when I had runs on my own, like there was a day I still remember one of my last days in Arizona that I like was so over getting up early, and I just had an easy run myself, and I ran on the canal in like the heat of the day. And I was running with my like then boyfriend, and I remember I just had this pity party and just like sat down. It was just like, I can't. It's so hot. And he's like, well, you should have gotten up. And I'm like, I'm sick of getting up early. But that was probably the shock to me. It was like I'd
Yeah.
done warm weather, like so growing up, going to the summer in Flower Mound, Texas, which is outside Dallas, actually pretty close to Denton, where I lived for 4 years, was where my best friend from childhood, spent her time in high school, and her family still lives there now.
Hmm.
That we would spend a big part of the summer together. So I trained in Texas, um, but Arizona was just different. And I don't think I do well in the dry heat. So it's interesting, like what people like. And so, like learning about myself as a runner, I'm like meant to live in the swampland. Like my body loves it. Like,
Yeah.
so we talked about like poor man's altitude and like the heat and humidity, like benefiting you if you can train in it. Like,
Right.
especially now, I guess being more mature, like I'm better at like my preparation. So like staying really hydrated all the time, like how I fuel myself, and like being really fueled up for runs. Like I've run the fastest times of my life in
Hmm.
Louisiana. And that was for Coach Bell. My second year of grad school, I was at McNeese State University. That's where I really got my first foray into college coaching, because I was at Arizona State, and, was very grateful Louis was coaching me, but wasn't really making big leaps in my own running, and kind of was realizing like, I think I want to be coaching. Like I want to be getting those experiences.
Okay.
So I applied to like every D1 position that was open. And obviously I didn't have a lot of experience. So the only reply I think I got was, to Coach Gilroy asking me if I wanted to come out and work for him at McNeese State, which is in the Southland Conference, right? Which is the conference
Mhm.
I'm now a head coach in, which is so neat how
That's
life works
funny.
out. But going there, I still was into my own running once I was there. I paced the top 2 girls on the team, and Coach Bell was coaching me still, and that's when I broke 34 minutes for 10K was while I was there. And then since then, I've run the next fastest in my life, coming back to Nicholls as the head coach and putting in some time into marathon training. Running my Olympic trials qualifier on the marathon like is about the same fitness. So it's interesting that the two
Yeah.
best times of my life are right under like 8 years apart, but both are in
Hmm.
South Louisiana. So
So you're doing some pacing duties, but you're coaching while at McNeese State as well?
yeah, and I learned so much from Coach Gilroy about like how to run a mid-major program.
Hmm.
He is phenomenal at doing a lot with a little.
Hmm.
The amount of money he raises for his team is incredible. When you're talking about not just like people just signing him checks, like you're talking about him like putting on big high school meets, like
Hmm.
just the things they put in place that like they do every year that raise so much funds for them to be able to do some of the great stuff they've done for their athletes over the years. Like I was so fortunate as a GA to he let me take the group to California, so that was where if he had people that were ready to go run fast, like
Wow.
you know and I look back, like he trusted me with so much, and I like probably didn't realize it at the time, and like he let me take Dave Rooney, who ended up finishing 7th at the national championship the next year in cross country. He let me take Dave Rooney to California to run. He didn't go. Like he let me take him,
Right, right.
with a couple of the girls and a couple of the guys, and we went out to California. I think he sent me with like 4 grand in cash. Like because I had to pay for the hotel in cash. I remember that. But we went out to California, rented the van, and people ran fast, and we came home. And
Wow.
I now look back, like kind of like when I was in high school, where you're just like learning the sport, and I was just kind of oblivious to some of the stuff going on, but you're like learning as you do. I'm like, oh, okay, like, and now realizing like, would I just let my GA take my top distance runners to California? Like, so he trusted me so much and let me get those experiences.
Yeah,
So
I love that development. I mean, if we're not building up our young assistant coaches, we're not going to have very good, or we're going to have slower to become good head coaches. Last week we had Dana Boone from University of Central Florida, UCF, on the program, and she talked about one of her first jobs. The head coach comes in and just throws down the travel budget and says, "All right, figure it out." And so she had to, like, it was her first job, and she's trying to figure out, buses and hotels, and she's like, "What in the? I mean, this is for SEC programs. So it was an extensive indoor and outdoor." And now she looks back at it and she's like, "Oh, thank goodness, like, thank you for developing me, trusting me in that, in what I'm doing. So I love that, Coach Gilroy, who does, you're right. Like, maybe we don't give enough props to a guy like Gilroy. What a great job he's doing down at McNeese State against a lot of odds, with some of the weather things that have just been devastating for the campus and the facilities. He never quits. He just keeps building and keeps building and keeps building, man. So shout out to Coach Gilroy, man, doing a great job down there. So
Yeah, and he had me book all the hotels too. So like just
yeah,
those things, and like here's the budget, like save me money, but give good accommodations, and like
right,
we did a, like he taught me all those things that I used at North Texas when I was handed the travel duties to do and
right,
maximize the money we had. I think Coach Sheffield was always pleased with like how I could like make our money go further, right? I prided myself on we want to stay at a nice place, but we can save money while doing it. We want to eat good food,
right,
but we can save money while doing it, and then have more money for other things we want to do. Whether it's more
right.
equipment or another trip or something like that.
Right.
So
Yeah, we're always going to encourage more equipment, Stephanie. I mean, that's just going to be in our nature. Always save hotel money for the equipment side, people. To make fun.
exactly. You call 5 more hotels, you will still get a 3-star, and you will save $300, and then you'll call up Mike at Gill and see what can you buy.
I'm gonna cut that snippet out. That's gonna be my next commercial for Gil. Thank you so much. So where
You're gonna
did
start calling hotels for people. You're
that's
like, so
right.
I found you a deal. Now you have to
Man,
spend money at Gill.
hold on, I gotta write that down. Yeah, maybe part of my duties needs to be travel agency. That's see, I knew that. I talk about the things that I get from hosting this podcast. That see, I get ideas right there. I'm better now because of that. Thank you. So where did you go from McNeese? Was it McNeese to?
That's when I went to Florida State.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah.
you mentioned that you weren't sure before we got on this. You mentioned like
Hmm.
you weren't sure where did I go? Was it Florida State? And I think that kind of connection, although there's an ACC rivalry now, so I don't want there to be confusion. Go Orange! But I think that just speaks to like Coach Freeman and like what he's done for mentoring young
Yes,
coaches. So when
yes.
I look at my journey and like how grateful I really am to like so many people that like just shaped me into like there was no other life for me than being a college coach is how it kind of feels. Like this is just what I was meant to do with my life. And looking at like what they built at Florida State, that like we kind of have this like alumni club of people that did not go to Florida State. Like
Hmm.
we went and worked for Florida State, and you're talking about, Josh Seitz, who's now Colleen Quigley's new coach, right, out at Portland State.
Right.
That's one of my buddies that Josh and I, like, we are so close. You would think we worked together at Florida State, but we didn't work together. He took over my position.
Hmm.
So, but there's just this connection. Like, he worked in the Office of National Fellowships and for Coach Harvey, which were my 2 jobs. Like, he interviewed for my old job at the Office of National Fellowships once I was leaving. They said, hey, you did such a great job in this position. Like, who's the new volunteer coach? Would they also have a degree similar to yours and like want to work here? And I was like, well, maybe. And then Coach Harvey had picked Josh, and it worked. And Isaac Wood was there after me as well, but like still someone that like I think if you asked Isaac and I feel like we're friends, like we know each
Hmm.
other, but like we didn't work together at the same time. The people I worked at the same time with at Florida State was James Snyder, who's at Temple.
Hmm.
Um, Andy Bilodeau is no longer, he's not in college coaching, but he was there at the time. He was a really fast 5K runner at UVA. And then Alicia York, who is now more into like fundraising, that kind of stuff. But she did the like the event side of stuff. She had a GA position where she did like put on the events and all the stuff because she worked at Penn Relays. But there's like this group that like I was there at the same time with, and I'm still close with them. But it's actually some of the people that were there before me and after
Hmm.
me that I'm in this club, and we take a picture at convention every year.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
Coach Raymond, I think, kind of started that because he was still president at the of the coaches association, right, for cross country, when he like would have these like reunion little get-togethers for us at convention. And then it's
Hmm.
kind of continued, um without him having to be the host, that we all get together and we all keep in touch. And
Hmm.
and now, interesting enough, like Griff Graves, who coaches at Syracuse with Coach Bell and was one of my college teammates, he went down and worked at Florida State with his wife Cassie. And so like here it is, like they're extra special because it's like, well, we both went to Syracuse, we
Hmm.
both are part of this little club at Florida State, and we're both currently college coaching. So
Wow. Coach Brayman does. You're right. The the coaching tree from guys like Bob Brayman are just, they're very far and very wide, a lot of branches and a lot of influence. Not only, we think of Coach Brayman as, the influence he has as a coach over his athletes, which, he's done and continues to do a phenomenal job, but the coaching of coaches, bringing up young coaches and whether, it doesn't surprise you. You mentioned, I think you said her name was Alicia York. She's in fundraising and stuff like that. It never surprises me when I hear of a coach who, whether they get out of coaching or they do something else full time, fundraising, teaching, own their own businesses. That never surprises me because of the versatility of coaches, right? I mean, you mentioned some of the things that you have to do as a coach, from the fundraising to the scheduling to the budgeting to the advising, academic advising. We have to be, as coaches, so versatile. And I think that's why I think our sport has maybe is doing a little bit better job coming out of COVID, because we're so used to, some of us are used to working with hardly anything because of the low priority of our budgets and things like that. But we're used to just, hey, here's the hand that's dealt to me. Well, I've got to make it work. And so unfortunately, it was a terrible hand that was dealt to us this past year. But we're getting ready. And I think you're seeing it in some of the meets that we have seen in cross country meets and indoor meets, that, athletes are running and jumping and throwing farther, faster than they ever have. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that is the byproduct of coaches preparing those athletes through this tough time. So, sorry, I got off the rant there. It was all about Bob Brayman. That's what it really was. You got me going on these rants now, Stefanie.
That's how I talk, right? Sorry.
It's all good. No. It's dangerous when two people like you and I get together and talk, because we'll, who knows what we'll be talking about next. So, how long were you at Florida State, and where was next after that?
Just the year at Florida State. And I was fortunate enough to have a couple interviews that summer. I goofed on 2 questions, I think, with Dave Smith out at Oklahoma State. I still think of those and they haunt me. And I sat in Panera, I think, for 3 or 4 hours talking with them on my interview day. And I think back to 2 of the questions that I answered. I was like, oh, what was I thinking? But I think, everything happens for a reason. And I've been fortunate to be able to work with Dave Smith on the executive committee. He trusted me to put me on a working group when I asked one year at convention, and still gave me those opportunities, I think, to grow as a coach in our sport from USTFCCA side. So like I said, just looking out, like with who I met and who I encountered, that look at that, someone I interviewed for, I feel like, he's always followed up with me if I reach out to him about something, and, so supportive of people that he's worked with or worked. So anyways, I lucked out that I did a good job on my North Texas interview with Coach Sheffield, and was really fortunate to take over, men's and women's cross country there, and inherit a team that Sam Burrows had built up, who, was at Cincinnati, and now he's at Xavier. He just took his first head coaching job. And I credit him a lot for leaving me I guess what would be the expression? Like, he left me a full nest, like I had all the pieces that, these birds were already flying or ready to fly. And so we were ready to go. They're eagles, so that works, my analogy there. But anyways, Mean Green, I just lucked out that I took over a men's team that he had placed second at the Sun Belt, and we were switching to Conference USA. And, that first year, to go and get second to Tulsa at the conference meet, and we hosted it. And then, we won the following year against, UTEP and Middle Tennessee State, and they were both getting ranked nationally at points, and UTEP made nationals that year. They got pushed in out of the mountain. And so we unfortunately only sent one individual. Troy Taylor made it to nationals. We were 4th in the region. We just didn't quite have it to go and get the points, during the season, or then to take out Texas at the regional meet is kind of your only way out of the South Central, right? You have to either figure out how to go score a point elsewhere during the year, which is tricky if you haven't done it before, I think. And then obviously, like I said, run on the day. But great fortunate experience there. The women were also no joke. I inherited Joe Adams, who had made the national championship in the 1500. I think she ran 4:15 before I got there. And, I got to coach her in the mile that year, but also, taking some girls like Charlotte Wilson was a 10:30 something steepler that I coached down to 10:13, so just getting that experience, but also developing some people myself that, were 19-minute 5K girls that I got down to 17 minutes over 3 years, but that part of those girls developing was because I inherited a group that was ready to kind of rise up, and recruited a bunch of like-minded people to come in, and had a good run, and then have been here at Nicholls building it up, because I didn't inherit a group ready to roll. I joke with Scott Williamson, if only I could have taken over when you left, like he had them rolling And it would have been more similar of a feeling to kind of what I walked into at North Texas, where you had these pieces and like, let me just start to add to this. But at Nicholls, we hadn't. I would say the nice way of saying it is like they hadn't been doing cross country. Like they were not. They were not participating in cross country, if that makes sense. And so to come over and say like we want to be a distance focused program, obviously I felt like I had the tool set to do that, the skill set, but I'd done it before, like I said, high school and college, and be a part of some other great distance traditions. But I had never started with the cabinet completely empty, and so now I'm in year 4 and it finally feels like we're here, we have the pieces to start being successful. We raced at our conference meet this Sunday for cross country / road racing extravaganza. We're on the roads. So, but I think that one of my former runners joked with me. She's like, well, that's right up your alley. Like, I love road racing. So I'm not happy. I love cross country too, but I'm happy to be on the roads. And I think we're at that point where we're really starting to build something here. And it's been an interesting but exciting journey the last 4 years. So.
If it's okay with you, I'd like to take a step back on something that you said. Part of the goal with the podcast here is not only to uplift and honor your journey, and I'm so thankful for your openness and authenticity through your journey in different spots, but also to maybe learn from our guest mistakes and my own mistakes here. So you mentioned, interestingly, about an interview with Dave Smith, great Dave Smith, right? National champions, championship teams, hosting. No, he's not hosting cross country this year. They hosted cross country nationals recently, didn't they? Or
they're hosting this year. Yeah, it's in Stillwater.
They're hosting this year. Oh, that's right. I'm getting Arkansas mixed up. That's right. Yeah, I was thinking, is that Arkansas? That's right. They're hosting this year. Do a phenomenal job.
Indoors at Arkansas, and then it's only 3 hours to Stillwater. I don't know how my brain doesn't process that, but they are only 3 hours apart.
Yeah.
So,
see, I'm all on the equipment side, so I know I'm going to Arkansas with a bunch of equipment. I don't have to do anything for cross country, so I'm good there. So as long as I know where Fayetteville is. But you mentioned you felt like you maybe answered 2 questions. I think you said incorrectly is the word you used. That immediately made me think of, I interviewed with the great Martin Smith at Iowa State when he was at Oregon. And not that I was super early in my career. I'm just so honored and humbled that he even gave me an interview. But I didn't do my homework very well. And one of the questions that I feel like I flubbed, as soon as you said that, it made me like, oh gosh, I have a hard memory with this, is, we were talking about the team, and I didn't realize, I knew he was a distance coach, and I knew Oregon has history of distance, right? Prefontaine, et cetera, et cetera. So I went with the headspace of, oh, okay, I know you are going to have to win on the distance side, meaning you're going to have to be a winner in cross country and on indoor and outdoor track. So there's not going to be a lot of scholarships for the others for the sprints and hurdles position. So I was trying to prove to him like, hey, I can get kids from the football team and I'll get walk on, and we may not make a 4x1 team. This was my exact quote. We may not take a 4x1 team to nationals, but we'll get some points at Pac-12s. Like that was I thought that's what he wanted to hear. And I thought that was going to be, my direction. Later, I learned Martin Smith is a very team focused coach. He wants 4x1s at nationals and long jumpers and pole vaulters, and of course his distance team. Right. And so I blew it. Like I was like, oh yeah. I won't do anything on the sprint side is essentially what I was saying. He ended up hiring a guy named Steve Sylvie who had won, many national champions as a coach at Arkansas. So I'm not sure what Martin was quite thinking, not hiring me, a rookie coach, over a guy like Steve Sylvie, but I digress. What can we learn? And you can be as specific or less specific as you want. What were those questions and how did you flub them? So what can we learn from that?
Yeah, and I'm struggling to think of exactly what the second one was, but the first one I know what I said wrong, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten the job anyways, just like you said, right? But I remember distinctly being asked about recruiting and talking about strategy, because it was a women's position, right? Like you would be coaching the women, like you'd be coaching with women, but recruiting women primarily. And I remember talking about that. I think something along the lines of like, I would still want to bring him in for like the big recruits, right? And like have him involved. But I think how I phrased it, I kind of meant it in the sense of like, at Syracuse, like Coach Bell recruited me, but then like Coach Fox still kind of swooped in at the end to like make sure I was going to come. And so I think that I accidentally made it sound more like I was afraid to like make those phone calls to the big girls, that I wasn't going to be able. Think about it, that time period. Would that have been, I'm trying to think of the right person, but think about, 2 years before that, like that I'm saying I'm not gonna be able to make the phone call to Colleen Quigley. You're gonna
Right.
have to,
Right.
right? I think, and that's it's kind of how it came off. And I the quote's blanking on me, but Diego, I think he's at Miami now, was also there, I think, interviewing, and he called me on it. And that's when I knew that I had like goofed tremendously on answering this question, that he was just like, oh, you mean you can't, whatever. He said something that I just remember being like, oh my God, like I answered this so wrong.
During the interview, he called you out?
Well, this is like, we're sitting at Panera for like the longest time I've ever sat at Panera. So it's one of those things where you're like interviewing the whole time. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So very different than like my experience interviewing I interviewed at Northwestern, like University of Northwestern, during my time at North Texas, where like my whole day was scheduled out for 10 hours of all these like structured interviews, right? Where you're getting interviewed by this person, this person, this person. But I realized, I think based on the interviews I've gone on, it seems like when a head track and field coach is hiring you, not an AD, you seem to end up in these situations where the interview is happening at every meal you're at, like throughout the day, which I knew, but like, so that's why I say I think of it as an interview question that I goofed on. Like we're sitting at Panera and we're both there talking and answering these questions. And like I said, he made some comment that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the wrong answer. And I think it's in that sense, like kind of like you were saying, like we get worried about like what they want you to do. Does that make sense? Like, so you're going in, and that's kind of our sport in a way, when you think about like maybe it's not clear what every role is, right? And like when you look at some of these positions where the lines are just really blurred, and like in a certain person in this role can take on more job duties, right? Or can take over a group, and I go back, I interviewed the same summer I interviewed at Nicholls. I interviewed at Harvard, and I think there I goofed on a couple of questions because I didn't understand like what am I doing in this, like who am I coaching, like, and not wanting to overstep.
Right.
And really, it's and that's the same. I think that was the other question I goofed on it that interview at Oklahoma State was, I think like who would I help coach, right? Or like taking over coaching a group, or like how that would work in some capacity. And I think I just didn't know how to answer it, right? And so I think that's the same thing that I at Harvard also still struggle with a little bit, when you're not clearly defined. Like, clearly at Nicholls, I interview with an AD, or if I go on an interview now with an AD, like I'm running the track and field program, the cross country program. I'm coaching who I want to coach. Like, you just need to maybe have an understanding of what you're expected to do with the resources you have, or you're finding that out on the interview. But I do think there's something tricky about our sport when sometimes you're interviewing for these distance positions when there's multiple distance coaches there. What does that look like?
Yeah, first of all, I got to give a shout out to Diego. He's a very dear friend of mine and has been a guest on the podcast. So if you want to find out more about Diego and why he would ask that question in someone's interview, Diego.
I don't know if that's, don't get me in trouble. I swear I remember him saying something and I was like, oh my gosh, I messed up.
Look in our back catalog, go listen to Diego's interview. He does have an amazing story. I've known Diego since he was a teenager. So he's a dear friend. But you brought up something interesting there. There is possibly, maybe not possibly, there is a difference between interviewing for the head coaching position, because it all falls on you, right? You're going to pick who your assistant coaches are, what they're going to coach, how it's going to be run, versus it may be two different types of assistant coaches, right? If you're interviewing for a Dave Smith, who's the distance coach as well as the head coach, and you're interviewing as the throws coach, well, you're probably going to be solely responsible for the throws coaching, right? The recruiting, the coaching, equipment, etc. But if you're interviewing with Dave for his assistant distance coaching position, well, that's totally different. You're very subservient to him because he is the head distance coach. So what would you, looking back, how would you, maybe not how would you answer the question differently, but how would you prepare for that question now, knowing how you answered and maybe what you've got now, because now you've got experience, right? You've done several different interviews, you've interviewed people. how would you maybe play it back differently, knowing what you know now?
Well, I think my quirky answer to that would be I'm just going to interview for head coaching jobs now. I think it's easier.
Hey, that's a great lesson right there. I love that.
I think that's easy. I really, because I think when you think about it now, like you're still just like, I think interviewing for like a head women's cross country job is a bit easier, if that makes sense. And maybe understanding the director you're going to work for. Like, do you know the funding? Like asking those questions about scholarships and stuff like that is going to make a difference if you're interviewing for like a head women's cross country job, right? So you might be interviewing with a distance coach that the men's distance coach is the head coach, right?
Right.
But I definitely think still going back to like that kind of position, which a lot of those exist, right? Syracuse has those positions,
Yeah.
right? I think I maybe would be more confident to just like ask a question back, where it's like, well, I don't, maybe even say like that, well, I don't want to overstep, but I'm capable of doing what you need me to do. I have a lot of confidence that I can run the show for the 5K, 10K group if that's the direction of the program. Here's how I would set that up. Here's how I think it could cross over and work with the mid distance group when we're training for cross country. I can run the whole show in recruiting, but I also think that you coming in and doing this would be beneficial. I think we could set up these kind of events on official visits that the head coach would be involved in. I'm ready to do all the lifting or whatever lifting you want me to do, right? And like kind of having a few different models that maybe you would talk about and say like, here's how my character traits, my personality traits like fit into these, right? Like that I can run the show or I can be a really good supporter, right? And I think that's maybe what I messed up on because obviously working for Coach Harvey at Florida State, like I worked for someone that like knew how she wanted to run her show. And I think we had a good relationship. We had a good year and I did a good job of just like supporting her, right? So clearly I could be in that support role, but I think also I've now shown like I can run my own group, right? I can have a team win that I coach, right? And have I can recruit my own group, right? And so I think I just didn't articulate that well. And so I think that that's the thing is instead of being scared of stepping on toes, like explain, like, I can't be in your mind. Like, I don't know what you're exactly looking for, but I think I can fill these roles in a variety of ways. And we can even like expand on that, like work through it each year and like review and see what's best for the team going forward. But I'm ready to contribute in a big way. Just how does that look,
I think that's great advice. You started that off by saying, well, maybe I would have asked a question back. So, what is your preference? How do you normally do it? Here has been my experience. I've done it this way, and then brought in the head coach, to close it. Is that your style? Because that's what I've done. If your style is different, okay, I can work within that style. My job, especially as an assistant coach, my job is to help you. You're the head honcho. Everything falls on you, like you mentioned earlier. So, what great advice there of like, hey, in an interview process, it's not 100% of the person who's offering the job asking you questions. You have every right to ask questions back. Well, what did you mean by that? How have you done that in the past? Well, here's how I could see myself helping. Because if it's not a good fit, if a head coach wants you to do everything, let's do the ridiculous, right? They want you to do everything, but you are at a place where it's like, I don't do it. I don't know how to do everything at this point. Well, that's not going to be a good fit for you. Even if you get the job, you have the potential to be miserable and and not succeed in that way. So it has to be, we talk about fit, whether an assistant coach fits into a program. We talk about fit with athletes. Does an athlete fit within a program? Well, that's also you as the assistant coach. How do I fit inside of this coaching staff, with recruiting and coaching, et cetera? That's really good advice. The one thing you can't force is experience, right? And so now, years down the line, you can look back and be like, man, why didn't I just ask because then I could have answered in a much better way.
Yeah, and even now being a head coach, I think one of the questions maybe I would tell someone to ask, and I don't know if other head coaches will like this, but maybe asking like, what do you currently feel like is your biggest waste of time for recruiting? Like, when do you feel like you are wasting the most time? Because I feel like, especially as a head coach that wants to actually get to enjoy coaching your athletes and writing training and preparing for, competition, like there's lots of things that you feel like you do that just like are a waste of time, right? But they have to get done. And so I think that that's a way to maybe ask that question. Like we're talking about recruiting, like, well, what's the recruiting thing that you either dislike, the most, or you feel like it's the biggest waste of time for you? And then as an assistant, like, well, how can I take over that for you? Or how can I contribute in a way that makes it feel like you're getting the biggest investment on your time? And so I think that that's what I was trying to say in that recruiting question, but I did it the wrong way,
Right.
And I think, uh, yeah. So I think that that would be my other piece of advice. And that goes for everything across the board. If you can help your head coach feel like their time is being used as efficiently as possible,
Right.
the whole ship is going to run more smoothly. So.
I mean, that's really great advice. Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I'm going to ask for one more piece of advice. So, as you have gone through your career, we've heard a story of, going through GA programs, assistant coaching programs, head cross country, and now the head of the entire program, track and cross country. What advice do you have to coaches who are maybe just getting started and they think, and not everybody is cut out for it, they think they want to be a head coach? What would you give advice to them as far as things to focus on or concentrate on to maybe achieve that goal one day in their career?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do is still remain diligent on coaching your group up to be the best it can be, right? So whatever coaching duties you currently have and recruiting duties you have, like that is like we have to do those things well, right? But then in addition to doing those things well, like taking on as many administrative tasks as you can, right? Even if it's just you find out your head coach is going to a fundraising event, like, well, can I tag along to that? Like, is that something appropriate for me to join you on, right? And just kind of shadowing and learning how to do some of those things. Or like I said, maybe you bring up at a staff meeting, like, is there something that I can take over for you that you feel like you spend a lot of time on that maybe I could do for you, right? And that's something maybe specific for travel, to be able to take over and learn those things. And that's gonna you need to understand how everything works as a head coach, right? And so it's the more hands-on experience you can get. Like I think back to, like I said, my time at McNeese is a lot of what I pull on
Mm,
now as a head coach. And that was very, very early on in my coaching career, but I saw a lot of things without realizing I was exactly shadowing it, right? And so I think that, like I said, Coach Gilbert let me put my hands in everything. I think there a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I didn't quite understand all of it, but I learned how to maximize a budget, which was important, right? And then I learned fundraising things, and then got to do more of that on my own going forward. So I think that's what I'd say is you have to just take on more, but in a way that can help your program that you're currently a part of, and you'll start to realize also what your strengths are then. So then when you do go into that head coaching role, what do I need to delegate
yeah.
first? If you're really bad at something, well then maybe like I think I do a great job at maximizing a budget, but let's say I'm a head coach that's terrible at that. Like, well then maybe for you, it's not only important to hire the best distance coach you can hire for your assistant coaching job, but maybe hiring an assistant coach that has experience with operating a travel budget, because a lot of distance coaches sometimes get tasked with that, right? And make sure that you hire the distance coach that you can hand a lot of the budget over to them, maybe, right? Like I think that Coach Sheffield was able to trust me to save him money. I was never going to be over, so then for him, that's one less headache, that he's not worried that I didn't map out the trip right. I mean, I mapped out the entire trip, right? Like, and stayed within the budget we had. And so that's something that I don't know if that's one of his strengths or weaknesses, but like he gave that task to me. So if that's something that's not a strength for you, like it is for me, like make sure in the hiring process you get someone that can do that for you. So that way you don't have to worry about it, right? Or make sure if you're bad at following the rules or you're forgetful of the rules, like hire someone that you can tell really likes the rules, like, and is always going to remind you, like, hey, I don't think we can do that, like, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. So I think that that's what I would say. If you're going to become a head coach, learn your strengths and weaknesses too. And then once you're a head coach, not just hire the best people to coach your event groups for you or recruit the best people, but what what skills do they have? What personality traits do they have that will complement your strengths and weaknesses so that you're a better version of yourself because they're part of your staff.
What a great lesson of self-awareness is what you're speaking of, right? And how do you learn self-awareness? Well, you find things that you can do and are good at, and then you also find things that you fail at and you're not so good at. So to have that self-awareness when you do get that head coaching job, not so much so that you can do or don't do, but you can delegate and use that as part of your hiring process. That's a great uh, I did not see that coming today in today's podcast. Hopefully, that is super helpful to current head coaches and future head coaches of that self awareness, all these things, these hats that you have to wear. Some of them you're going to like and do really well at, and some you're not going to like and maybe not do so well at. Well, that's what a staff is for, building that team. We talk about making sure you have the jumpers and the throwers and the distance runner. Well, same, it's on your staff, making sure you have the right people to coach things on your staff and also do the rules and the budgeting and make sure you have that rules person. That seems I don't want to see anybody on a headline reading an article about you because you didn't know the rules. All right, let's make sure we we know the rules. Stefanie, thank you so much for being here today. I'm just absolutely just blown away with your authenticity and humbleness and openness. It's not an easy task. To sit here and talk about your life, but also to have me as the host sit there and say, "Hey, you said you made a mistake. Let's talk more about that." So I'm just so thankful for you just being open and honest and the value that you're giving the listeners.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciated getting to share.
Absolutely, Stefanie. Super appreciative. Good luck at the road race cross country championships coming up. By the time that we publish this, it's March 8th today when you're listening. We'll already know how well she did, and I bet it's going to be pretty good, knowing Stefanie. So thank you so much for being here today. Again, just so appreciative of your time and attention listening to these amazing coaches around the country. If you found value in today's podcast, and boy, I hope you did. There was a lot of value there. Go back and re-listen and take some notes on some of the lessons. We get to use Stefanie's experience to make us better here in the present and the future. But if you found value, I'm going to bet that other people in your network would find value in this episode as well. So please share it. Facebook, Twitter, smoke signals, TikTok, whatever you're using nowadays. Let's go out there and share that. That just mean the world to me and all of our guests to share the value that they brought today. So thanks a lot. Join us next week and we'll do it all over again. We'll have another amazing coach.